He had never even imagined a future like this before, imagining something like he was going back to school at this age, then shown a powerful attack from the sky that then managed to destroy the building below when it landed. The attack came from a man with a sword in his hand. The man's figure was reflected in the eyes of the monster he was now facing, seeing the figure of the man who was now getting closer to him. The monster then roared loudly, not afraid. The man then chopped the monster's body into several parts using his sword. The man's slash was very strong, making parts of the monster's body cut off. After finishing off the monster, the man then looked back. There were several figures who came to him. Seeing that, a smile was then plastered on his face. They were friends of the man's friends. The man also did not expect to be friends with them. At that time, heavy rain hit that soaked a magnificent castle, and in the castle a fire was seen burning throughout the room. There were 4 figures separated by fire into 2 sides. With one side, a man with black hair was seen protecting 2 girls behind him, while the other side was seen a man with a knife in his hand. The black-haired man then asked the man in front of him why he wanted to stop them so much. The man had already said it, they should not advance more than this. He knew the person in front of him was the protagonist of this story, Taylor Clore. But Taylor ignored the man's words, which had an implicit threat in it. He then approached and attacked him while shouting the name of the man, who was Ed Roth Taylor. Ed looked very calm. Even though Taylor's attack was approaching him, he then cast a spell called Ignition, which then gave rise to a smoldering fire that burned around. But Ed's attack was parried by Taylor. Ed then took out a bow and was seen aiming at Taylor, who attacked him. Ed himself is a third-rate villain character in this story. In the original story, he was destined to be a useless nobody who didn't even appear often in the story. However, a third-rate character seems to have their own way. Ed then changed the direction of his aim, and instead of aiming at Taylor, he aimed at one of the 2 girls he was protecting. They were then shocked to see that. Ed then opened fire, which managed to hit the girl, but Ed's own body was successfully stabbed by Taylor using his sword. But instead of feeling pain, he smiled slightly. He didn't need understanding from others. He would not do it in the manner of a protagonist of the story. Taylor was then angry at Ed's smile that seemed to mock him. Ed would do it in the manner of a third-rate villain in this story. So that he could reach the end of this story, he must survive. In a luxurious room, a young man was seen reading a letter he was holding. The letter contained the sins he had committed so far, such as using dirty words in front of the princess, interfering in the entrance examination of the Holy Sylvania Academy, and so on. While reading the letter, the young man wondered if they removed his name from the family register. He felt like God's fate was mocking him. The young man was Ed Roth Taylor, and soon he was kicked out of the house he lived in. People then talked about it, but there were people who were still afraid of him because of his bad reputation. But his friend told him not to worry, because Ed was not even recognized by his own family. He even got kicked out of his dormitory. Hearing that with a little anticipation, he then asked, would they not see him in the next semester, and said, he shouldn't have cheated on the entrance examination. Now the situation has become very sad. Ed himself can now only sit in the garden while feeling depressed. He feels that this is unfair, because the arrogant Ed Roth Taylor that people are talking about is not him. He himself is a modern human who entered into a game. This game is based on the magic school, Sylvania Academy, his favorite game, the failed swordman of the Sylvania. Generally, when someone enters a game in webtoons, they would be the son of a noble, a genius but bastard clan young master, or a lawless SSS rank hunter. But out of all the possibilities, he was a third-rate villain who was kicked out of the dormitory at the beginning of the game. He had become the worst character at the worst time. Ed then cried out unfairly with the situation that happened to him. He had always lived simply, not even greedy. Seeing that, the people around him then felt surprised, because Ed still said unfair after all he had done. They felt Ed was really shameless for saying he lived simply, while Ed himself could only sit transfixed while holding back his shame. They then walked away. Ed then looked at the mirror. There he was surprised by his stats. He wondered if these stats were real. He attended the magic faculty, but his intellect stat was really pathetic. Even his stamina was too low for a nobleman. Even the peasant NPC had a stamina of 5. No wonder he was only a third-rate villain who appeared in the early scenarios. Even he himself didn't remember much about Ed Roth Taylor's character. He didn't remember what would happen to him later, but then he suddenly remembered something about Ed. In the corner of the ending credits, he became a beggar, like a tramp. Ed really bemoaned his future fate, but at least, he was lucky to be alive. He then could only sigh, and wondered why he possessed Ed's body. He didn't know the reason, nor did he need to find out. He then strengthened his resolve and said he would try his best. Rather than a school, the Sylvania Academy was more like a city with the entire Arkan Mountains as its place. In the northeast of the academy, there was an untouched forest. Ed tried to escape from the gaze of the students, and ended up here after walking for half a day. That was enough to explain the situation he was in. When Ed was expelled, that was the extreme beginning of the scenario. Fortunately, although he was expelled by his family, he hadn't been expelled from his school just yet. This was very important, because in the game it was said that Sylvania Academy was a top academy. If one graduated from here, they could be guaranteed a bright future, and as long as the game setting is still in the academy, he can use the information of the 5 times dedicated players to the maximum. He can live comfortably and better than his previous life. So, his goal now is clear, which is to graduate, but the problem now is the tuition fee. This semester's fee has already been paid, so he only needs to think about the fee for next semester. Ed paused for a moment because he knew how difficult it was to get money with his current situation, and thought, whether with his pathetic stats he could get a scholarship, he could only pray that he would not fail. He then decided to think about his tuition fees later. First, he had to solve the important problem, namely clothing, food, and shelter, how to avoid turning into a bum for the next week. He still had enough clothes in his suitcase, so he just needed to find food and shelter. But the problem was that he had no shelter or food for today. It was difficult to find a job because of his bad reputation. He also couldn't go to the dormitory because he had been expelled. It seemed that he would be in the forest for some time. He was grateful that at least there was still a river nearby. There are still 10 days before school starts. Until then, Ed decided to train himself so that he can compete with his peers. In a forest near the Sylvania Academy, there is someone who chants wind blade repeatedly, which creates gusts of wind around. That person is of course Ed, although his stats are pathetic. But he is still grateful for at least being able to use spells. Even though this is tiring, he himself was also surprised. Because he was exhausted, like he was going to die just from cutting 15 tree trunks. This also made him even more hungry. He felt that this was not very useful. He hated his family for not even giving him a meal before they kicked him out. He wondered if this hunger arose because of using magic. Ed really felt hungry at this time. He then remembered his grandfather's words when he was a child. When hunger struck when his grandfather was a child, he said he ate tree bark in the mountains behind. While enduring hunger, Ed then continued to stare at the tree trunk in front of him. He then decided to boil the tree trunk using the ignition spell. He couldn't be picky now. He had to eat anything while it was edible. After taking a closer look at it, Ed felt that it was like a chicken breast. He then decided to eat it, and as he chewed it, he then felt that he couldn't stand the horrible taste and spit it out. On the 3rd day, after starving for a day and vomiting for 2 days, he drew the conclusion that the wood should be used to build a house. First, he needed to raise the frame to support the wood. He only had 2 hands, but 4 supports were needed. This is not an easy job. Ed himself failed many times, but he still kept trying, until finally he succeeded in tying the frame. Now the frame of the residence is complete, but he knows that there is still a long way to go. He can't sleep in the field, although it is a little unfortunate, but he has no other choice, and the night has now turned into morning, until Ed finally managed to build his simple residence. But he was then surprised when a system window appeared in front of him. His crafting proficiency had increased after doing that work. He was surprised that the crafting system also appeared now. Ed lived as a noble, so he probably didn't know. He was more talented with dexterity than magic. His handiness even reached level 4. Knowing that, Ed then decided to utilize his dexterity stat to make a weapon called Simple Harpoon. After making the weapon, Ed then decided to look for a more decent meal. He had spent 2 days on an empty stomach. As well as doing excessive work, he shouldn't be able to move now. But perhaps it was the feeling of depression that drove him. He wanted to eat meat, so he tried to fish in the river. Luckily he managed to catch some fish. He was very happy about it and decided to cook it right away. A week before school started, he just needed to survive like now. If he could survive until then, he could go through school without much trouble. That's how Ed thought at this moment. Someone suddenly came up to him. Ed was shocked when he saw who it was. He was so busy surviving that he forgot something important. The person who came was a beautiful girl with blonde hair, one of the main characters in the story, but of all people, Ed did not expect to meet her here. He then recalled the scene in the game. There was Ed who was arrested and was about to be expelled from the academy by her. She was the Princess of Fenia, the person who expelled Ed Roth-Taylor from the dormitory. Ed Roth-Taylor is a villain who appears immediately after we start the game. Using his status as a nobleman, he hit the main character's childhood friend. But he ended up being punished. Not stopping there, with a heart full of revenge, Ed then cheated on the main character's Sylvania Academy entrance exam. But he was caught by a girl who came to take the entrance exam while hiding her identity. She is Phinia Elias Clole, the third princess of the kingdom of Clole. Ed was then immediately interrogated by Phinia, who has an insight skill that can detect lies and conspiracies of the target. Ed Roth-Taylor, who was caught in a pathetic state, gritted his teeth and made many excuses. But all his lies were exposed by Phinia's insight skill. He was then expelled from the dormitory. Everyone in the academy probably hated Ed Roth-Taylor. Phinia then asked Ed, what was he doing here? Ed really had bad luck because he met someone who shouldn't have met. Phinia then realized that the academy had not expelled Ed. Ed only replied that he was also still a student here, but he was still expelled from the dormitory. Hearing that, Phinia didn't want to mince words anymore. She then told Ed to just get out of the academy. She couldn't bear to see someone as shameless as him hanging around the academy. She would talk to the academic department and personally request his expulsion for the crime of committing a despicable act as a student of this academy. For the crime of cheating another student by trying to block his way to a better future. Hearing that, Ed didn't pay any attention to her words at all. Instead, he felt annoyed that his fish was getting burnt from listening to her talk for too long, even though Phinia said that she would speak briefly, besides the burnt food being a problem. In any case, this was a life crisis, because this person, Princess Phinia, really had the power to expel him from the academy. Therefore, with a threatening expression, Ed then asked, the sun will be setting soon. Aren't the nobles always guarded by heavily armed soldiers? With an intimidating look, he continued, could a noble princess come to a remote forest like this alone? But Phinia wasn't afraid of that at all, and said that he would regret it if he was going to threaten her because he thought she wasn't guarded. But Ed didn't mean to threaten her at all. He then knelt down and said that he wanted to thank her. Phinia naturally doubted Ed's sudden change in behavior. She then activated insight to prove the truth of his words, but she was surprised, because the skill insight stated that there was no lie in Ed's words. Ed knew the reason why Phinia looked surprised. The Roth-Taylor family that Ed came from was very famous and had great influence, but the Roth-Taylor family used that privilege to exploit the population and run human experiments for research on eternal life. For the main character, it was a family of trash that was destined to be destroyed. People in that family would be imprisoned or executed. However, he was now not recognized as part of that family anymore. He was cold and hungry now, but this was still better than dying. In the long run, this was actually good for him, so he needed to persuade Phinia like this without lying, or else, he would be expelled from the academy. When that happened, this would be game over for him. Looking at the timeline, when around Ed Roth-Taylor was expelled, this time should be about a week before school started. He wondered what was the reason Phinia was here. After struggling with his thoughts, Ed then said to Phinia, by coming here unescorted and wearing simple clothes, this could only mean that she must be completing the class placement exam. Professor Glass's class placement test. This was a test to find the magic bead hidden in the forest. Professor Glass's test was known to be rather cruel. Of course, if it was Princess Phinia, she would aim for the best class, which was Class A. Phinia only thought Ed was trying to flatter her and said that he hadn't changed at all. She felt that she should ask the academy to expel him immediately. But she was then shocked when she heard Ed say, but without his help, she would never be able to get into Class A. If his words were a lie, Ed allowed her to expel him from the academy. Ed continued, if she goes to the lake in the southeast of this forest, there is a small grassy island. There is a giant tree in the center of the island. The tree was called Marilda's guardian tree. There, she would find the present he left behind. Phinia looked incredulous because she found what she was looking for by following his clues. This really changed the impression of Ed in her mind. Ed Roth-Taylor, who from 3 days ago was clearly a liar and a cheater, she still clearly remembered his miserable situation at that time. However, the Ed from earlier was completely different from the Ed from before. Phinia could only remain silent while thinking about it, until finally it came to the time when the class placement exam had officially ended. Professor Glass then told the students to take out the beads they had gotten. Some students then took out the strange objects they had managed to get. Professor Glass was silent for a moment seeing that. He then immediately put them into Class F. The intention of the examiner is worth noting. This exam is not just about finding just any magic bead, Professor Glass said. Those who will enter Class A are only those who find beads that lack magic power. Only 3 people found this type of bead. They are Zix, Lortel, and finally someone who found a bead hidden in the guardian tree of Marilda, whose height of magic power was unusual. Professor Glass then pointed to the student. She was of course Phinia. She would now be the top-ranked student in the class because of that. Back to Ed. Ed was still lamenting about his burnt fish. He now didn't even have the energy to use a spear anymore. He was now making a simple fishing rod with makeshift materials. He then thought about the third princess of the kingdom, Phinia Elias Kloll. Since she was a child, Princess Phinia was used to flattery and sophistry, which was the reason she sharpened her insight, which led to the creation of her innate ability. No one could escape from her insight, therefore, there was no choice but to give her the real information, but that also led to more complicated problems. The reason that the high-handed Princess Phinia would later be called the Princess of Love was because after facing failure during the class placement exam, she will enter class F. Then after that it will start to change. However, if Phinia, who had a great influence in the original scenario, found the golden bead and entered class A, then the main story scenario would collapse. Even if he managed not to be expelled, all the information he had would be useless, then she would be finished. But still, there was still the top rank in the class. She was Lucy Merrill. Ed felt that the future might remain unchanged. Insight will always see the truth. Phinia also noticed an irregularity. Ed was not lying, but this was not a present. Actually, the reason why Princess Phinia hid her identity was because she was ashamed of the special treatment she would get if her identity was revealed. She wanted to prove herself. Just by looking at her bead she immediately knew that it would give her the best results in the exam. But Phinia could not take the bead, as finding it would be something that she didn't accomplish on her own. The title of Princess of Love that she would get in the future was not a skill or stat, but rather a title that she would get for walking the path of justice. Ed had thrown the bait to the princess. Whether it was truth or lies did not seem to matter so much. The princess could always distinguish between the two, although if Ed Roth-Taylor really believed the princess would fail the exam, she was sure she could succeed and show it off in Ed's face. However, Ed Roth-Taylor did not lie. Because she really could not get into Class A, the princess now could not do anything else. With a feeling of annoyance, Phinia said she would keep an eye on Ed. While Ed himself was now busy fishing, he was very happy when he finally caught a fish. Time passed until finally arrived when the Sylvania Academy began. Ed seemed to live in a place where he had to start running from early morning to get to school on time. He ran as hard as he could, until finally he arrived. He returned to the Sylvania Academy. When the academy opening ceremony was about to begin, the students were seen sitting neatly while listening to the speech from the school and eating the dishes provided. Ed was certainly present there. He could hear the whispers that spoke badly about him. But he decided to ignore it, and began to enjoy his meal. He himself seemed to have finished a lot of dishes by looking at the many plates piled up on his table. His goal now was graduation. The students were now still talking about it, but some of them noticed something different about him. Ed continued to enjoy his meal while listening to the conversations of people around him. He didn't have any ambitions, he just wanted to graduate. There were some female students who were talking about the dessert cooked by the famous chef and decided to try it, and one of the female students felt something strange about Ed. For some reason he felt like a different person. Ed himself hoped that he could go through his school period quietly, and nothing happened. Today was the first day of the Sylvania Academy. Students were seen sitting neatly while listening to a speech from a teacher. However, on that first day, Ed was almost expelled. He himself was currently summoned to the principal's room. He did not expect Phinia to tell the principal about him, although from the way the grumpy old man spoke with a smile on his face, it seemed that Phinia did not say anything bad. He almost avoided it. Ed then decided to be careful so that the storyline would not deviate from the original. Life skills honed for survival, and magic training suitable for a student majoring in magic. To get the best combination of the two, there is no better weapon than a bow. When his life skills become more and more proficient and he can make good quality arrows, he would be able to cast spirits or magic on his arrows, though of course, spirit formula are outside. Ed then looked surprised when he saw a girl taking shelter under a tree. The girl was named Janica Faylover, a second-year student, as well as the top rank in the class, Genius Spirit Sorcerer. Janica also seemed to notice Ed's presence. She then asked if he was the amusing guy Marilda was talking about. Ed could only stand still hearing that. Janica then enthusiastically introduced herself. Seeing that, Ed confusedly asked how she got here. Janica then asked if he was surprised that she knew about him. This forest was the territory of Marilda, a high-ranking spirit. He heard a lot about it from her. Ed was quite surprised that the ruler of this forest told Janica about him. Janica only said that Marilda was quite nosy. With her attention scattered all over the place, it was obvious that she knew about unwanted visitors. Ed couldn't say a word hearing that. He had indeed killed many animals here. He had also cut down many trees. Ed felt worried about that. Janica then told him to stop worrying about small things. It was the law of nature for creatures in this forest to catch and eat each other. Marilda was also not bothered by such things. Ed looked blushing when he saw Janica, who was getting closer to him. Ed then tried to divert it by saying that he thought even giant wild wolves had soft hearts. Janica suddenly blushed at Ed's words. She then laughed while putting on a sweet smile. Janica said that there was something she wanted to show him. She then showed him a spirit, and asked him if he was cute and adorable. Yesterday she made a contract with him as soon as she saw him. She then asked Ed if he wanted to try to touch him. Ed seemed quite surprised by that and the fact that Janica made a contract with that spirit. Ed thought, if he wanted to be friends with Janica, he just needed to talk to her at the right time. However, Ed then told her that he didn't know what she meant. He didn't see spirits at all. More precisely, he couldn't. Janica was surprised to hear Ed say he couldn't see spirits. Ed replied yes, and said that he came here to find food, so now, he would leave. Ed thought, only by following the original storyline could he gain an information advantage. Janica Faylover, a person who played an important role in the original storyline, was a person he should not approach. Janica could only stare at Ed's departure. She then recalled what Ed said earlier. Just like Marilda said, she felt that Ed was indeed an interesting person. Then a figure of a big white wolf along with a bat appeared behind Janica. No matter how hard she thought about it, she felt that Ed really couldn't see Marilda. Janica wondered who Ed really was. Janica then lay comfortably on Marilda's body. She had tried to be nice to Ed, but he only replied yup. She was a little upset about it, but that didn't mean they wouldn't see each other again. From now on she just needed to find out. The next day Ed then returned to running as hard as he could so as not to be late. The distance between his shelter and the student area was not close at all. He was almost late by leaving at dawn and running as hard as possible. Just by heading to the academy, he did a ridiculous thing that actually increased his stat. There was also a mysterious figure watching Ed who was heading to the academy, but he didn't seem to realize it. He thought, if he wanted to win the scholarship, he had to study more diligently. He wrote on a stone slab using a burnt twig and borrowed a book from the student library. While Ed was trying hard to study, Janica was seen watching him from behind. On the way home, Ed washed his sweaty clothes. For the day, there was also Janica who was still watching him. But Ed's activities for today were not finished there. He had to check if he had enough firewood, drinking water, and beef jerky for tomorrow's lunch. He could only sleep for 4 hours because of this, but that was not what bothered him the most. He then called out to Janica who had been following him. Janica was shocked that Ed was aware that she was stalking him. Ed said, it would be strange if he didn't know, because he was Ed Roth Taylor, the worst punk ever, and asked why she kept approaching him, but Janica just said that it was just other people's judgment about him. Ed was surprised to hear that. Janica said that she didn't even know him. Ed couldn't help but think that Janica Faylover was indeed this kind of character. She did look naive and stupid from the outside, but she really independent-minded. However, knowing what would happen to her in the future, he couldn't answer her with a smile, because Janica Faylover was the final boss of Act 1. She was the only character who smiled at Roth Taylor. He didn't want to go this far, but, Ed then said, if so, since fate made them meet each other, could she help him? Hearing that, Janica looked very enthusiastic to help him. Ed said, as he could see, he was in a mess right now. He was banished from his family, and he was in trouble. He then asked Janica, could she lend him money? Janica was speechless hearing that. Ed continued, isn't that what friends are for? It's not that he won't return it, he just borrowed for a while, and asked how much money she has. Every year, Janica gets a scholarship for being the top of the class, but that's not just a sign of her greatness. Her background is so poor that without the scholarship, she can't enroll or continue to higher levels in this academy. The daughter in a small ranch, Janica, her weakness is money. Janica apologized and decided to run away from here immediately. Ed had expected that. 3 days later, although Ed felt bad about it, but he didn't want to get involved with important characters again. He had to be careful, so that the story would not deviate from the original, and when Ed was about to enter the residence, he was then very surprised when he saw a girl sleeping there. The girl was named Lucy Merrill. In order of importance, she's a character with an even heavier presence than Janica, the subject of admiration of her classmates and even the professor, a rare genius and the most powerful character of the failed swordsman of Sylvania. Ed wondered why she was sleeping here. Lucy then suddenly woke up while stretching her body. It was because someone was too noisy that she couldn't sleep. Ed himself was still confusedly thinking what she was doing in this mountain valley. Feeling that the person Lucy mentioned was him, Ed asked what he was doing. But Lucy quickly replied that it was not him. While pointing behind him, Lucy said that what had been noisy was the wolf behind him that was the size of a house. She continued to talk to him. Ed looked shocked by that. Lucy continued, the wolf asked him that one day, he could save Janica no matter what. As Ed recalled the incident, he wondered, this won't lead to anything, right? But it didn't take long for him to realize how wrong that thought was. Today was the combined combat training. The combined combat training was actually a mock one-on-one combat training. In order to minimize the danger as much as possible, combat students usually used wooden weapons. Many main characters participated in the combined combat training this time, including benevolent Princess Phenia, golden daughter Lortel, spirit sorcerer Janica, slothful Lucy, and wicked Clebius. Ed could continue to name them, and the list would not decrease. Even so, the most important person was the protagonist, failing swordsman Taylor. Ed wondered what Taylor's next fight would be. He was looking forward to it. Ed already knew the result of this combined combat training, so he didn't pay attention to the fight, because the winner of the duel in the combined combat training episode was a first-year student, just like Taylor, except for one person. Ed looked quite annoyed with Janica, who always bothered him. It was hard to believe Janica ran happily towards him after going through the miserable experience of Ed asking her for money. Unlike Lucy, who belonged to the cat family, there was no doubt that Janica belonged to the dog family. Janica then showed him the list of fights that had been released, but Ed said that he was not too interested. Janica then asked why was he not interested in his fight. Ed was immediately shocked to hear that he also had to fight, because in the original storyline at this time Ed Roth Taylor had been expelled. Ed thought about who would be his opponent, and when Ed saw the list of battles given by Janica, he immediately broke out in a cold sweat to see who he had to fight later. While looking at Taylor, who gave off a typical protagonist aura and was waiting for his duel opponent, Ed thought, right now, it doesn't matter who he will face, he just needs to keep an eye on Taylor. Even though it was a world behind the scenes, he had lived as Taylor for a very long time. From the sad bad ending to the true ending that left a deep impression, he completed the journey repeatedly. Among many routes, there was not a single route that was not difficult and hard. Ed had decided to take care of his own life. However, while striking an encouraging pose, Ed said to himself that he was rooting for Taylor. But he was then confused when he heard the announcer continuously calling Lucy. He wondered where Lucy had gone. He also didn't see her at the reserve podium. It turned out that Lucy had gone up to the arena while yawning continuously. The duel this time was between the first-year top of the class, Lucy Merrill, versus Taylor McClure. Unlike Lucy, who looked very relaxed, on the contrary, Taylor had now prepared a horse to fight. The protagonist of this world was born to be a swordsman, but in his life, he had never held a sword once. But with the first slash of his sword, he slashed through Lucy's lightning-quick magic. The spell that she thought would hit the target was successfully blocked. It took her by surprise. As Taylor erased the distance between the two of them, surprised by that, Lucy then attacked him with lightning strike, medium-level lightning magic. Taylor was then defeated by Lucy's magic spell casting reflexes, but Lucy was disqualified for using mid-level magic, giving Taylor the honor of being the first to defeat Lucy Merrill. It was a legendary scene. Ed was very excited when recalling the scene, and finally, the duel between Lucy and Taylor began. When the duel began, Taylor was the first to start the attack. The attack could certainly be resisted by Lucy using her magic easily, but the impact of Lucy's attack was too strong, causing Taylor to be seriously injured. The audience was immediately shocked to see that. While Lucy herself looked a bit bored to the point of making her yawn, the audience still felt surprised that the fight was over so quickly. But they were not so surprised because the one Taylor fought was the top of the class. They also thought Taylor's decision was quite stupid. For rushing towards a mage like Lucy with empty hands, Taylor McClure's life has always been filled with tests, a villager and a failed student, an underachiever who has never gotten good grades since he started school, a failure that no one recognizes. When everyone draws conclusions about his match, in a cruel situation where they pity him, even in the midst of all this despair, Taylor never lost hope. Taylor then got up while holding a sword with a fiery aura enveloping him. Ed was very excited to see that and looked forward to what happened next. Taylor then rushed quickly towards Lucy. Lucy looked surprised by Taylor's momentum. While smiling widely, Ed thought that Lucy would use lightning magic like in the original story. But he was then surprised, because instead of using lightning magic, Lucy instead used wind magic to block Taylor's attack. Even though his attack was blocked by Lucy, Taylor did not just give up. He still tried to attack Lucy with all his might, but it was in vain. Lucy then made a beast shape using her wind magic, and released it to attack Taylor. Ed was very surprised when he saw Taylor thrown far back. The whole room was instantly silent. Ed was still surprised by the fact that Lucy did not use lightning magic, but wind magic. With Taylor's defeat, the host then immediately announced that Lucy was the winner. Ed still couldn't process what happened, and was shocked by Taylor's defeat. Seeing Taylor, who could only desperately walk out of the arena, Ed thought this would be a big problem. He couldn't let Taylor be in that state just like that, protection of the wind. This is a continuous magic obtained through a contract with the high-rank wind spirit Marilda. As Ed ran past Lucy, she asked could he give her the jerky now, but Ed just ignored that, according to the scenario. Originally Marilda and Lucy were two separate existences. Because Lucy came to him, he ended up making a contract with Marilda and got stronger because of that. The host then announced the next duel, which was between Ed Roth Taylor and Princess Phinia Elias Clole. Phinia was also preparing to face him, but Ed ignored all that and continued to run after Taylor. He thought Taylor should win, raise the sword, and gain courage. However, in the end he lost because of him, because of his existence in Sylvania. When he had seen Taylor's figure from behind, Ed then loudly called him. He didn't know if this had any meaning, but he felt it was better than silence. Taylor was silent in confusion. Hearing his call, Ed then told him that his efforts would definitely succeed, and asked him not to feel sad. No one should make him feel ashamed. Ed thought, if Taylor's heart was really broken, the chances were high that in the end he would have to work hard, so he tried to encourage Taylor. Ed then told Taylor to walk bravely, because he had done his best. It was just that his opponent was not the right person for him. Don't let things like this get him down. There will be more trials happening at the academy. Taylor is the one who has to be the one who faces it, not him. Then a little flashback of Phinia's story is shown. She has been praised by Emperor Clole since childhood as a person born with divine blessings. Emperor Clole was the first to realize her innate insight. Her ability was not something given by an ordinary god. The life of a royal family was filled with endless deceit and conspiracy. From within that dark abyss, Phinia developed this talent herself as a way to protect herself. That's why Princess Phinia could be confident in her ability. There was a disgusting abyss inside the eyes of the royal family that upheld Phinia. Even when she looked through them, she lived as if she didn't know. At the moment when the duel between Ed and Phinia was about to begin, Ed said humbly not to attack him too strongly. Ed had no choice but to stare right at this person. Phinia then replied with the same words as Ed. Seeing Ed in the arena, the students then whispered because of Ed's actions that shouted at Taylor earlier. They just felt that Ed just wanted to mock Taylor, and maybe just wanted to look like a good person by supporting the person he bullied. All the students still looked at him negatively. Phinia, who heard the comments, also thought they were right. Ed used to use his position to humiliate his juniors, and when it didn't go his way, he was caught changing the test results. Really a shameless person. But that was him in the past. Phinia then recalled Ed's behavior, which had changed drastically lately. She wondered if maybe Ed's actions were real, until finally the duel between the two of them began. Phinia then suddenly said that he had confused her. Ed was then confused by her words. While preparing her attack, Phinia said that she wanted to prove her guess from this duel. She then started her attack. She attacked Ed using water magic, because the magic that Ed could use was wind and fire. She wondered how Ed would respond to this, throwing everything away while exchanging moves. A dramatic battle as the finale, removing the mysterious person from her heart. But of all her guesses, the thing Phinia didn't expect was, Ed didn't dodge her attack at all. He didn't even defend. That certainly made her shocked and confused. Phinia's attack succeeded in making Ed fall. Ed then immediately admitted defeat. Phinia couldn't believe it seeing that. Because Ed didn't even parry after seeing the trajectory of the water ball, the students immediately laughed at Ed. They thought Ed's actions were even worse than Taylor's. They mocked him for being cool but being defeated in one attack. They also praised Phinia for her action. Ed then got up and said that this was a good fight. He had learned a lot. Phinia was speechless hearing that, now that she thought about it. After Ed went up to the arena, he never once made eye contact with her. Phinia wondered if Ed was not interested in duels from the beginning. Shortly after the host announced Phinia's victory, Ed knew now was not the time to playing duel. When dealing with Princess Phinia, it was best to be careful, and not let her influence the scenario, because Phinia was an important person in this scenario. But the person more important than Princess Phinia was the protagonist of this world, Taylor. Therefore, Ed was currently looking for Taylor's whereabouts. But he was confused about where Taylor was, but he was then called by someone from behind him. That person was Phinia. Ed then asked her what she was doing here without a single bodyguard escorting her. Phinia immediately became angry at Ed's actions earlier during the duel. Ed then told her to calm down and only said if she was talking about the duel. He really has learned a lot of things. Phinia certainly didn't believe in that excuse, because she knew Ed didn't even intend to win at all. He was only thinking about the fastest way to get off the stage. She was very annoyed by that. Plus she was already struggling with classes, but the fox-like merchant was only thinking about ways to control the academy. Professor Glass's annoyance did not diminish at all. Plus, the servants were always babbling about the ways of a royal family. Phinia seemed to be venting all the frustration she had been harboring. Ed could only silently listen. She was already dizzy from everything. but Ed was making her even dizzier. Ed was quite surprised by that, and the fact that Phineas had harbored all these frustrations. Ed then grasped both of Phineas's shoulders while calling out to her. He then told her to breathe slowly and please calm down. There was no point in her panicking like this. Ed then tried to guide her to calm down by breathing in and out. Phineas then suddenly fell silent while covering her face using both hands, and asked what happened just now. While holding back feelings of shame, Phineas then told Ed to forget what happened just now. Ed could only agree to that. Ed asked if he could go now. Phineas then said that she had a bad habit. She could ask directly, but she felt like she had to keep guessing and guessing what was on their minds. This was probably because she had stayed in a palace for too long. Ed didn't seem to be able to leave now because he had to listen to Phineas babbling. He was also sad because of that, because he also had to find Taylor. With a serious look, Phineas then said that she would ask him frankly if he was trying to break ties with his family, because he knew their dark side. While pointing a finger at him, Phineas continued. The reason why he bullied Taylor was because he needed a reason to be expelled from his family. Ed thought that was a pretty accurate assessment, although there were many mistakes. The thought that the Roth-Taylor family had a dark side was true. However, that was something he would investigate later in the distant future. Ed then pretended to be confused and said that he didn't know what she was talking about. Phineas certainly didn't believe that. She didn't want to admit that she was wrong. She then asked what exactly was the meaning of the words he shouted at Taylor. Why did he encourage and support the person he wanted to expel? Did he never dislike Taylor in the first place? Ed thought that this was a fitting question. He then answered that it was because he just wanted to mock him. He only said it because everyone hated him. If he encouraged Taylor, maybe people's views would change. But Phineas could clearly see that Ed was lying. She then told him to look her in the eye and tell her the truth. Phineas then activated her insight. Ed then replied that he was telling the truth. The insight then stated that Ed was lying. Phineas was very upset with Ed's attitude. Ed suspected that Phineas might not have proof. The most important thing, following the initial scenario, was his only hope. Phineas then looked resigned because she also couldn't say anything because there was no evidence. She then allowed Ed to leave, because she knew Ed who had wanted to leave. Maybe there were important things he had to take care of, because from the beginning he kept staring at the door. Ed was grateful for that. Ed thought this was the first time Phineas showed this side of her, as someone who would affect the initial scenario. She was already involved with many people and events that could give her a headache. This might be his fault for being a new addition to the scenario. Before leaving, Ed then said to her, how could his burden be compared to the burden that the princess was carrying? This might be a little out of line, but she really looked tired, although it was important to pay attention to complicated politics. But she also needed to rest a little. This place was not a palace where she had to worry about every little thing. This was Sylvania Academy. Phineas had lived her life trying to see through someone's lies. But this was the first time someone had really seen through her. Phineas felt touched by the attention from Ed. After successfully leaving Phineas, Ed then continued to search for Taylor's whereabouts. He regretted that he had wasted too much time. If Taylor gave up, then her comfortable life, no, even this world might end, until finally Ed managed to find Taylor. He then immediately called him, but he was then confused about what he should say. A girl suddenly blocked Ed's path and told him not to come closer, with tears in her eyes. The girl then told Ed not to bother Taylor anymore. The girl is the main heroine in this story, Isla. Isla said, Taylor was already struggling even without her. So she told Ed not to bother him anymore. Taylor then got up and suddenly asked him, so you're still at school? Ed was surprised to see that and thought that Taylor had revived, a fighting spirit that never wavered no matter how strong his opponent was. Taylor then came forward while calling his name. A determination was clearly seen in his eyes. Ed then realized, when he dueled with Fiona, his childhood friend and biggest encourager, Isla immediately ran out the door without looking back at all. She then immediately approached Taylor and gave him words of encouragement. With Isla by his side, Taylor would rise again and again. Taylor then asked him, why is he here and does he have something to do with him? Ed was silent for a moment. He then praised Taylor's skill in using the sword. Taylor didn't quite understand what he was talking about and asked what he was planning. Ed had gone through many experiences with Taylor, and was always with him until the end, so he decided to be honest. He then said that he didn't plan anything. Ed originally thought Taylor was the one who would save the world, so he just had to figure out how to survive. He treated him like an obedient person because he was the protagonist of this game who would do all the hard work instead of him, but at this time, he was relieved. Ed then showed a faint smile, not because the story deviated far from the original back to the original plot, but because Taylor who had been with him for so long was still fine. That was all he needed. Ed then left. The two of them could only stare silently at Ed's departure. The two of them then could only feel surprised and think that Ed was just acting cool. Ed couldn't avoid this. He then looked in a direction. A violent explosion was suddenly created in the place that Ed was staring at. He wondered if it was time. Originally, everyone should have watched this while sitting in the Nail Building, the battle between Golden Daughter Lortel and Spirit Sorcerer Janica Feylover, although this was in a different form from the original. But Ed was sure Taylor and Isla were watching this scene. Ed silently told Taylor to open his eyes wide, because one of the many tests that came his way was the final act. One boss, Janica Feylover, and this time the duel was won by her. The students then flocked to congratulate her on her victory. Janica was the only one from their class who won against the new students. They considered Janica to be perfect because besides having a very good personality, she was also proficient in spirit magic. Janica just smiled and thanked for that. The medical team then suddenly passed by, while the students were congratulating Janica on her victory. Janica herself was shocked when she saw Lortel's badly injured condition. Janica's gaze suddenly went blank when facing this contradictory situation, unlike in the original story. Lucy defeated Taylor, and everything ended with the main character of the combined combat training being Janica Feylover, who became the proud protector of the senior students. Janica already had a lot of friends, but this incident would make things even more troubling for her. But Ed felt that this was even better. He wouldn't meet her on cam anymore. Every time he got involved with the main characters, his head became dizzy. Time passed and it had been 2 weeks since the combined combat training. Without the main characters bothering him, Ed can really study and survive without worry. He now has a fishing net, so the matter of food is quite resolved. When Ed opens his status window, there can be seen Ed's rapid progress so far. He feels like his body is getting better, because of the increase in his stamina stat, but it was still too early to be lazy. He then stepped out of the river in a position still shirtless, but what was unexpected was, nearby there was already Janica peeping at him. Janica blushed when she saw him still shirtless. Janica then asked if he liked being naked. Ed was annoyed by her question after she suddenly appeared here. He was just fishing. After bathing in the river, Ed then lit a campfire to warm himself. Janica then asked what was so good about this place that he always came back here. Ed replied that this was like a very secret base, so he felt like an adventurer and it was fun. Janica then said that she wanted to talk to him a little, and she needed some advice too, but Janica looked a little unsure of her tone. Ed then wondered about it. Because out of so many people, why should it be him? Janica then said he had left first at that time, so maybe he didn't see it, but at the combined combat training last month, she hurt someone. Ed knew what she meant, but he still felt confused, because as far as he knew, her opponent used a medium-level spell even though it was not allowed, but it shouldn't matter to the good-hearted Janica. Janica continued. She kept trying to forget about it, but she felt that maybe at that time she was overreacting. She couldn't get rid of the thought of herself overreacting. Ed then understood. Janica then asked if she should apologize to her, but her friends would definitely stop her. They said she was wrong first, but Ed still advised Janica to apologize if she felt she had to. The fun and cheerful second-year student, Janica, was a treasure to everyone, precious from all sides, so if she felt guilty or reflected on herself, everyone would come forward to encourage her and take her side. But Janica knew that it was good to have someone different by her side no matter what, but that didn't erase the mistakes she had made. Janica felt Ed was great. He never took her side without looking at the situation first. Ed then apologized if it offended her. Janica then tried to stop him and said that he misunderstood. She was not offended at all. Janica thought, last year Ed was not someone like this. Janica is indeed a cheerful and smiling girl, but she is as considerate as the person beside her. Even when Ed asked for money when he was in trouble, he did not show the desperation that people usually show in such situations. Janica felt that this man indirectly told her not to approach, but Ed's side is like that. Janica said, it actually makes her relieved, if everyone in the world is like him. In her eyes is an unusual comfort, and the night passed quietly. The next morning, while walking to the academy, Ed thought that this is a serious problem. The failed swordman of the Sylvania is called a masterpiece, but very few people have seen the ending, especially beginners who always get bad endings at the beginning. For example, if we save a girl during a kobold invasion in a class placement test, we will see Golden Daughter's secret. She then sends someone to kidnap Taylor, and that way Taylor is then killed, in the monster killing training episode. If we skip Isla's childhood friend and form a unit with Golden Daughter, then the next scene is Isla falling off a cliff and dying. That's because Taylor was supposed to save Isla who fell off the cliff. If we protect the Golden Daughter from the fire spirit Tarkan, who was summary by Janica, then Taylor High.self will be burned to death. Those are some examples of bad endings that occur in the game. Someone then asked Ed politely if he didn't hear her. While sweating coldly, Ed thought that he should run, but the person quickly passed in front of him. Ed then asked how long she would follow him. The person did not expect Ed to grit his teeth and ignore her for that long. Ed thought, of course he would grit his teeth and ignore her. Wasn't it obvious? Because that person was the fourth heroine of the failed swordman of the Sylvania, the only daughter of the prominent business figure Eld Ketchum, golden daughter Lortel Ketchum, aka the newbie destroyer. Lortel then said that she wanted to borrow 2 hours of his time. The role given to Lortel is a hidden heroine. Unlike Fenia, Lortel is treated as a villain from the start, but her true character will be revealed in the second half of the story. When players understand the realism of Lortel, her sadness and loneliness, they will be faced with a choice between Fenia and Lortel. Seeing Ed, who had been silent all this time, Lortel then tried to call him once again. But Ed just walked away, which made her speechless. Ed thought, for now he should not fall into her words. If he fell into Lortel's plan, he would lose control. But Lortel did not give up so easily. She then approached Ed and asked him to at least listen to her first. She really wanted to help him. Ed still tried to stay away and told her not to make promises that she could not keep. Lortel then stopped right in front of him and said that she was amazed to see him. He still continued to learn even in very difficult conditions, although she heard that he was a little arrogant and selfish. But she thought it was not so important. Ed then asked what she wanted to talk about. Lortel did not answer immediately and instead took out 3 gold coins as a down payment. She then questioned Ed about his closeness to Janica lately. Lortel asked him to help her be friends with Janica. Seeing the 3 gold coins that Lortel took out, Ed pondered for a moment. It was equivalent to several people's salaries for a month. But, did she think she could buy connections with money? Lortel just smiled at that. She then asked Ed to just keep the money for now. The more people on her side the better. Ed was a little surprised because Lortel already understood her position. That she would be involved in a political battle with Phoenicia to get the leadership of the academy, so it is very important for her to make allies now. Ed smiled for a moment after thinking about that. While thrusting his hand forward, Ed then said that he agreed and asked her to shake hands. People who live in wealth all their lives will be crushed when they face poverty. It is very easy to crush those who are already cornered like this, even if it is just for a small amount of money. They are willing to sell their families, even their dignity and self-respect just for 1 gold coin. It's easy to dominate those who are desperate. Unfortunately, it won't happen. Looking at the 3 gold coins that are now returned to her, Lortel feels this is interesting. She can only stare at Ed, who is now slowly moving away from her sight, while Ed himself is feeling very upset at the moment. If he accepts it, his burden might be reduced. It's a pity, but if he brings the newbie Crusher and Janica together, he can't even imagine what bad things will happen. It's important to avoid anything that can change the original storyline. That night, despite being faced with Ed's sharp attitude, but Lortel did not feel offended at all. She then approached Janica in her dormitory, always calculating profit and loss, a smart merchant who never let go of an opportunity. Janica was surprised when Lortel suddenly came to her. Seeing Lortel with her hair down made her look different in Janica's eyes, and Lortel became more determined to make Janica Fey Lover her ally. Lortel then asked if she remembered the incident during the joint combat training a few days ago. There was a big commotion because she used an intermediate spell that should have been banned. It was a long time ago. But she really wanted to apologize. Lortel just wanted to see how great the second year's best student was, even though she was injured, but it was a high price she had to pay. Seeing Janica, who looked worried at her wound, Lortel immediately asked her not to worry. It would soon heal. Janica seemed like a hero in a fairy tale to her. She wondered if she used her guilt, would she be easier to overcome? But she was then surprised when Janica suddenly asked, did things not go well with Ed? She then asked what she meant. Smiling, Janica said. She tried to refrain from talking about personal matters as much as possible. The spirit loves to chat. Almost everything she said near the North Forest reached her ears. Lortel then asked for an answer about the deal she made with Ed related to her. Janica said she was touched that Lortel was willing to invest gold coins to be close to her, but sincerity is not something that money can buy. For her, Ed's approach made her more touched. Janica then corrected her attitude because she felt that she was too arrogant as a senior. Seeing that, Lortel thought she should correct her judgment on Janica. Janica then said that she had to leave now. She had to prepare a lot of things to make a contract with High Spirit. She had gotten a lot of support lately, so she had to work hard. It was a misunderstanding to think that Janica Feylover was a fairy tale hero. Janica then suddenly paused. She then apologized for the incident for hurting her. Lortel thought Janica was a person who even knew the dark side of the world. Janica wished her a speedy recovery. She's a person who maintains her cheerful personality. Janica then left there. Lortel could only sigh and felt this was difficult, but strangely, Earlier she felt like it was very dangerous. While Janica herself thought she had to work hard, she hoped good things would happen. The next day, the sun was shining so brightly that it shone on Ed's clothes that he was drying. There was also Lucy. She couldn't stand the smell, so she flew away immediately, which caused the clothes that Ed had just dried to become random. While picking up the clothes that had fallen, Ed then realized the presence of someone. She was the senior maid of the Ophilus residence, the best dormitory of the Sylvania Academy, Belle Maya. She was also the maid who had expelled Ed out of his dormitory before. Maya knew he was here because Janica often talked about him before, but she didn't expect him to live like this. Ed could only be silent hearing that. Maya was grateful that there was a good change in him. Ed could only agree to that while holding back his confusion. Maya's words buzzed in his ears, but his gaze kept drifting. Maids in the Ophilus residence handle all kinds of household tasks, including the food of the students. They are an elite group that organizes every task perfectly. The basket she carried contained high-quality ingredients that these elite maids gathered from the forest. This was valuable information that could not be found in books, Ed then recalled. In the episode where Maya influenced the storyline, while Ed was still deep in thought, Maya said he didn't have to be formal with her. He could talk to her like when he lived in Ophilus. But Ed said he wouldn't. Maya was quite confused to hear that. Ed then said, how could he not respect a maid who always worked hard like her? After Ed recalled, there was no episode where Maya directly influenced the story. Then, it wouldn't hurt for an extra like them to get closer to each other. Ed then heard the explanation of various edible berries, mushrooms, and herbs from Maya. His crafting skills were now improving. He could even make a fish trap with a 2-star difficulty level. He had enough meat and fish now. His food problem was almost solved. He then boiled something using ignition. His 2 basic spells, Ignite and Wind Blade, have now reached level 10, although it is only 2 basic spells, but he continues to use it every day. And before he knows it, it has already reached level 10. Soon the herbal tea that he boiled using ignition earlier has now finished. He used his basic spell to burn wood or cook. With that, his survival efficiency increased significantly. As proof, he has already finished all his work, although the sun has not set. To be honest, Ed is quite enjoying this. But he was then surprised when he saw something that was about to fall from the sky, until finally it fell and hit the place where he was. The impact of it made Ed thrown. He could only groan in pain. It was not clear exactly what had fallen from the sky, because the impact of the fall was so powerful that it made dust fly up, which caused impaired vision. Ed could only put on a confused look while wondering what happened. The residence he had built hard was also destroyed just like that. After a while, Ed was now slowly able to see what had fallen earlier. What was surprising was that it turned out to be Lucy. Lucy lamented that she was almost dead. Ed was immediately angry to see it. He also asked who could make the strongest mage in this world get goosebumps like that. Lucy then answered Belle Maya. Ed did not expect this at all. Lucy was just lazing around as usual, but for some reason, suddenly she got goosebumps. She saw a strong fist thrown at her. The attack was very sudden, so she had to teleport from there. It seemed that the blow would be very painful if it hit her. Ed was of course very upset to hear that. Lucy even asked if he had beef jerky. Unable to bear this, Ed then snapped Lucy's head for messing things up for such a trivial reason, but Ed was then surprised because there was absolutely no protective magic protecting Lucy. Lucy said her mana was gone. Ed was happy to hear that. With a cruel smile, he then snapped his fingers at Lucy in exchange for his house, which was now destroyed. Didn't stop there, he also snapped his fingers once again at Lucy instead of Maya. Ed also realized that he needed a sturdier house. It was time for Ed to build a new house with more decent wood. But since he was busy, he gathered all the information he needed at the library in one go. He had read books about design documents, materials needed, and so on at the library. All that was left was to study the woodworking and the construction of the roof. But he was then told by someone that soon the library would be closed. The person also praised Ed for being very diligent. Ed did not expect it to be this late. He apologized for it. That person was Aika Island, a first-year student of the Faculty of Magic. Aika did not mind it. Seeing a diligent learner like Ed even made her inspired to be even more enthusiastic in her way of learning. She then introduced herself to Ed. Seeing the anticipation on Aika's face, Ed thought there was something strange. It seemed like Aika wanted him to say his name to her. Ed then introduced himself, and Aika's reaction afterwards was as he expected. It seemed that her bad reputation had not disappeared. She was still too busy to be able to change it, but Ed was then surprised when Aika said the rumors turned out to be quite different from the reality. Ed had read all those complicated books in just a few days, and he had also read 6 technical texts today. They said that he acted all arrogant when they didn't even know anything. It seems that rumors can't always be trusted. Aika knows other people who are as diligent as him. Aika said she would support him. Ed thanked her for that. Aika then said goodbye and asked Ed to be careful on his way home. He also needed to close the library and then return to the dormitory, but Ed was then surprised when an earthquake suddenly struck which caused them to have difficulty standing up. Aika then felt scared when a large bookshelf was about to fall on her. Episode 1, the final chapter, Glaskin Showdown. The cause of all this turned out to be the magic circle summoned by someone, at 11:30 p.m., at the temporary camp in front of the student council. Thanks to the efforts of the protagonist, Taylor, and his group, many students have now been secured. It has been 2 hours since this unexpected disaster appeared. Isla said she had read about it in the elemental magic book. It was a summoning circle for Glaskin, the high-level dark spirit. Phinia felt that the situation was bad. The only person who had such a high spirit resonance was that person, the possibility of their enemy being the one who went crazy because of the dark spirit, the number 1 student in the second year, Janica Faye Lover. They were silent for a moment hearing that. Taylor then said, "This is unfortunate, but they can't just stay silent. If what Isla said is true, then the shield around the academy can only be a time stall. If Glaskin is successfully summoned, it will only bring greater disaster. They must immediately go to the student council hall." Hearing that, Claire, the captain of the Royal Guard, said, "People outside the shield area will soon realize it. If the Royal Guard and the professors intervene, then the situation will be solved easily." Elvira Enistan, the first-year alchemy department, chimed in. "The shield made by the high-level dark spirit must be solid. They must solve this problem from the inside." The headmaster Abel is also not here. If they all unite, she was sure they would be able to defeat the dark spirit, but the gloomy Clebius Nortondale suddenly rejected the suggestion. They had to break through the middle-level spirit and then fight the spirit boss to be able to infiltrate the building and hold Janica. Not only that, there were 2 high-rank spirits inside. Clebius emphasized it very much, the high-rank berserk fire spirit Tarkon, and the high-rank spirit of darkness philosopher. It was tantamount to suicide. He did not want to participate. Hearing that, Lortel then asked if Janica could do that alone. Wasn't she too strong for a second-year student, summoning and then maintaining that many spirits, while summoning Glaskin as well? Isla guessed that the majority of her strength must come from the power of the philosopher. Janica was just a container for its manifestation. Dark spirits are the main enemy of a spirit sorcerer. Their power is so great that makes them difficult to control by a spirit sorcerer. In fact, you could say that they are demons who play and control spirit sorcerers. That's why all spirit sorcerers guard their minds. Otherwise they can be devoured. No one knew how the Velosphere managed to control Janica, the most expert in the field of spirits, but that was not the most important thing right now. The crucial thing was to decide their future actions. There was only one person who could decide that. Zix then asked Phinia to instruct what they should do. Phinia was silent for a moment hearing that. The environment was suddenly silent as everyone waited for her decision. Suddenly, the words of the man who looked indifferent came to her mind. If only she could do that. Phinia then said they would move in an hour. Only trained people would move later, including herself, Claire, the best students from each year, and Class A students. They would only bring people whose abilities were tested, so Phinia asked to prepare them mentally. She would take full responsibility. Right after that, someone suddenly reported to her. They had finished gathering the workers who worked in the professor's building, but Audrey Hall and the magic potion warehouse were under attack. It seemed that they could not join them. In other words, only they could move. Phinia was dizzy because of that. There were no other students they could contact. But someone then hurriedly said, she had just come from the library. In the student library there was a friend of hers who was an apprentice librarian and one second-year student who was still there. Phinia then asked what their names were. The girl answered Ika Island. Zix was immediately surprised to hear that. He hurriedly asked the girl about the truth of her words. The girl said yes, she and Ika were studying Grimory's management together in the library. Zix then decided to immediately save Ika because he knew Ika couldn't protect herself. They then tried to calm him down. The library was quite far away. At the moment, their main priority was to defeat Janica, the root of the problem now. In the library there was also one second-year student trapped there. Maybe they should trust that student for now. Their reasoning convinced Zix a little, but he still felt indecisive at the moment. Phinia then asked the girl about the second-year student, but the girl seemed hesitant to say it. Zix immediately told the girl to stop hiding it, and quickly say it right now. The girl then said, the student was Ed Roth Taylor. Zix's aura instantly changed when he heard that name. The girl apologized. Ed continued to be there until late at night. She felt upset, until she left him with Ika. They knew themselves what kind of person Ed was, but Ika would not care about such rumors. They did not believe that Ed Roth Taylor, the bastard, was trapped in the library with the librarian. Phinia and Lortel were worried about Zix's current situation. They then tried to stop him from leaving. Phinia still suggested to at least believe in Ed. They were certainly surprised when they heard her suggestion. Phinia also seemed to realize her mistake, but Six completely ignored them, and immediately rushed towards the library. Even though many spirits were blocking his way, Six still continued to move forward by slaughtering them all. If Aika got the slightest injury, he promised to kill Ed without mercy. Even the saying of a dragon rising from a small river is not enough to fully describe Zix, the magical flora spearman. Then a little flashback of Zix's childhood story is shown. He was at that time hunting a deer. Judging by its size, it was a mature male. The condition of the bark around it indicated that it had just passed through. After coming to that conclusion, Zix then prepared to hunt it. The northern imperial grasslands, a wild land, which even the voices of the imperial family could not reach. When the time was approaching the evening, people who went there had to check if their heads were still intact attached. Six was a descendant of a wandering tribe that traveled around that land. When he reached adulthood, he was separated from his family. Since when he was left behind, why he was left behind, could he return to his tribal life? No one knew. He had learned to hunt deer even before he learned to read letters, instead of buying goods from the store. He was first good at looking for scraps of corpses on the side of the road. So the conclusion is, the life of a beast. Looking at Zix, who walked in the middle of the city while dragging his hunted deer, the people there seemed to be whispering about him, but Zix was confused when someone suddenly asked his name. Seeing the little girl in front of him, Zix then said his name. The girl felt that Zix was like a wolf walking on two legs. At that moment Zix realized the endless life of wandering in the vast northern grasslands. By eating animal carcasses found on the side of the road, sleeping under the moon as his roof, living like a wolf cub abandoned by his pack, he had lived such a lonely life. Seeing Zix, who suddenly cried, made the girl surprised. She then asked if he was okay. On the day he found a life companion, Zix then realized what loneliness felt like. Zix was then adopted by Aika's family. Aika and his father welcomed him as family. Pursuing a fast-flowing social life, his wild life gradually became a thing of the past, and the young wolf was now a human. But in order to protect Aika, he was willing to become a beast again. He had heard rumors about Ed Roth Taylor. He cheated on the exam paper and offended the princess, and bullied the junior students. Zix drove so fast that it destroyed the floor under him, but he was then surprised when he saw Ed in a badly injured condition. Seeing his arrival, Ed then asked who he was. Ignoring Ed's question, Zix then immediately asked where Aika was and why he was here now. Zix told him to immediately tell him where Aika was. Ed answered reading room number 3. Hearing that, Zix then immediately went to the place Ed mentioned and left him alone. Just as he had just arrived at reading room number 3, he immediately asked if she was okay. Seeing Aika, who was fine without any injuries despite being unconscious, Zix felt grateful. He really felt very grateful. But then he realized something. The bookshelf, which was heavy enough that even a grown man could hardly lift it, was installed like this to protect Aika. The curtains were closed so that the rampaging spirits could not see it. He then saw a writing on the blackboard nearby. The blackboard said, "If you come here, don't panic and stay here quietly. It should be over before dawn, so block the entrance well and don't provoke the spirits. Always think about your safety first and don't move carelessly." At that moment Zix also realized someone had protected Aika. There was blood on the suit used for Aika's blanket, but Zix knew this was not her blood. He then saw the blood splatter that was visible outside the door of the reading room. Zix at that moment also knew who had protected Aika, even though the person himself was injured. He did not care about his injury and himself bleeding while protecting Aika. Zix was very confused why Ed did this, while Ed himself currently felt this was useless. 3 hours earlier, just as the earthquake had just hit which caused many books to fall, with a bloody condition Ed finally managed to protect Aika from the bookshelf that almost fell on her. He was grateful that he had been training his strength, otherwise the situation would have been bad. This episode was going faster than he thought. Judging from the summoning circle, it seemed that the battle for the conquest of Glaskin had begun. But he was confident that Taylor could handle it. He felt that it was best not to pay attention to a place full of important characters in the story. He couldn't change the future at will, but time was precious. He couldn't just sit back without doing anything. Soon the rage of the low-level spirits would pour out, so Ed decided to block the entrance to prevent the raging spirits from entering, and use this opportunity to refine his cabin to be better. Now, he would eat the beef jerky he had brought and do research all night. But Ed suddenly remembered something. The reason Janika's ability was special was in her high proficiency in spirit understanding and spirit resonance. These two stats were developed through contact with spirits. Since meeting spirits belonged to the realm of talent, it was almost impossible for someone like Ed, who couldn't even see spirits, to raise his spirit stats. However, with Janica summoning so many tangible spirits, Ed could give him a lot of EXP. He would gladly take it. Ed could hardly believe his crazy leveling speed. Ignition had now reached level 12, and spirit magic had reached level 7. Only one level left, but unfortunately, Ed wondered if he combined spirit resonance and spirit understanding to surpass level 15, would he be able to make a contract with a spirit? But he had already tried to reach his limit. More than this, he might be in danger. Seeing Ed, who was still sitting there, Zix then asked what he was doing here earlier. Ed was quite annoyed that he didn't even let someone who was full of injuries rest. But he didn't have to lie to answer him. Ed then answered that he was practicing. Zix could only sigh at his answer. He certainly didn't believe Ed's answer. Even the most naive human couldn't believe it. Zix felt like he understood a little bit about what kind of person he was. All this time he turned out to be that kind of person. Ed was quite confused by his words. Zix then bowed to him and said that he owed him a big debt. He promised that he would definitely pay this debt when the opportunity came. Ed instantly realized that Aika must be Zix's lover. Actually, Aika's name was only mentioned in the plot book, so he kind of forgot about her. But Zix was a friend who always trusted Taylor from the beginning of the scenario to the end. A very important character, so he shouldn't be here. Ed then said to him, "It seems that you left the student council building and came straight here." If he had made sure that Aika was safe, Ed told him to leave quickly and do his own job, run to the student council building, help Taylor, just follow his words and all this can be taken care of. Zix was surprised when Ed suddenly mentioned Taylor and asked if he meant Taylor McClure. Ed said yes, the one who always barely avoided failure. Zix didn't understand why he looked up to Taylor so highly. He had never really talked to him. It was a matter of compatibility rather than assumption. Especially since only Taylor's elemental slash could hurt the shell of the high fire spirit Tarkan. In Act 1, Chapter 9, Taylor learned his signature skill, elemental slash. The success of this episode depended on that skill. If Taylor used elemental slash, they could win. Zix thanked him for his advice. There was not much time, so Ed told him to move quickly. He would rest here for a while. With that advice, things should continue as desired. But Ed suddenly realized something. Why Zix was not yet friends with Taylor. In Act 1 Chapter 9, end of semester evaluation, in their duel, Taylor lost badly, but he obtained the elemental slash and penetrated Zix's magic. Impressed by Taylor's persistence, Zix then admitted it and they finally became friends. But the last chapter of Act 1 happened 1 month earlier than the original. Act 1 Chapter 9, the end of semester evaluation, didn't even happen, so Zix finally hasn't befriended Taylor. Taylor hasn't learned elemental slash and there is no one in the conquest team who can deal damage against Tarkan. He didn't realize that everything was falling down. The headquarters of the conquest team, in the student square. Arriving there, Zix immediately apologized to them and promised to make up for his mistake. They didn't mind that. Even though Zix was here too, they still weren't optimistic about their victory. The conquest team's first entry failed. If they wanted to start the assault again, Claire suggested that they should call for more reinforcements. He would join after the pain in his leg subsided later. Phinia told Claire not to exert himself and rest at the headquarters. He couldn't even walk properly. But Claire couldn't just do that. If she really cared about him, he asked Phinia to retract her order. Phinia also felt heavy when making that decision, but she also had a heart. She was grateful that at least they still managed to retreat, but Claire could no longer fight. Clebius was also injured. Phinia was really confused about what she should do, but she finally decided to conquer Tarkan with the remaining troops. But someone suddenly interrupted. They didn't have enough time to catch Tarkan. They then looked at that person, looking at the summon ritual. It would be completed in a moment. Phinia did not expect that he would come here. Actually, this was the situation Ed wanted to avoid the most, but there was no choice. He then suggested to divide the conquest team into two. He would lead one of them. Now, he himself would take care of the scenario. They found it hard to believe when they heard such a thing from Ed. Clebius also told him that this situation was not a joke. But Zix immediately stopped him and told him to at least listen to what he had to say first. Ed continued. They had to face Janica, who was under the control of the dark spirit philosopher, after passing Tarkan, the fire spirit that Janica summoned. But as they knew from fighting Tarkan, his shell was impenetrable. So it was impossible for them to deal any damage. That way, they didn't need to fight Tarkan directly. While one group distracted Tarkan, the other group could enter the room to practice combat to subdue the controlled Janica. By bypassing Tarkan, they could fight Janica directly. But Lortel felt that it didn't make sense at all. The current summoned Tarkan was much different from the one during the combat training back then. They managed to retreat earlier just because they were lucky. If the distraction group failed and Tarkan went after the conquering group, or worse, if the distraction group was slaughtered, we would end up fighting both at once. The risk was too high. Ed knew that, but they could reduce the risk only if there was another option. Their main goal was to conquer Janica, then Tarkan would lose power. Zix then asked the crucial question, who would enter the distraction group? Would they just draw lots for the suicide mission? but Taylor suddenly took the initiative to enter the group. But Ed immediately opposed it. He told him not to be careless and not to join the group. He should be part of the group that entered the training room. But Taylor was still adamant. His speed was advantageous. He was not sure how long she could run, but if sacrifice was needed, he was the one who had to go. Ed then immediately corrected his wrong thinking. They were not choosing sheep to sacrifice. They did not need to divide the two groups equally. Clebius and Lortel were enough, and he would also join them to distract Tarkan. But the two of them immediately refused. After hearing that, Ed told them to trust him. He had a way that could tie Tarkan's legs, but the two of them didn't seem to believe it at all. Ed was annoyed because they also had little time left, but Phineas suddenly agreed to his plan. She still didn't understand his intentions. She then issued an order as Phineas Elias Clole, the third princess of the Empire of Clole. She will divide the conquest group into two, Taylor, Zix, Elvira, Isla, and she will be Janika's conquest group. Clebius, Lortel, and Ed Roth Taylor will be Tarkan's distraction group. Time is precious, so she will shorten this. Please don't die. After that they carried out the plan with their respective groups. Nailgwyn Corridor. After arriving there, Ed's group finally saw the figure of Tarkan. Lortel then asked how the plan was to intercept the fire lizard. Ed told her to just follow his words. If they kept following the plan, they would definitely win, and they ran towards Tarkan. Seeing Clebius' worried look, Ed then told him not to worry. The gloomy Clebius was easily scared and lacked confidence in his abilities. But he was the top student of the first-class combat faculty. Ed encouraged him. He could do it. Clebius himself was confused why Ed could be so confident. He wondered if there really was a way behind that door. In the room practicing combat, there is Janica Fey Lover. They only need to lure Tarkan. He got carried away because of the princess's determination and ended up here, but he was not alone. Maybe he could gather the courage to try. Clebius's spirit was lifted again at this time. Seeing the lowly human who approached him, Tarkan immediately let out a burst of breath. Clebius was anxious again when he saw that. He then asked how they lured him, but he was then confused when the two people who had been behind him suddenly disappeared. He immediately broke out in a cold sweat. He felt very scared when Tarkan slowly approached him. He then immediately ran in fear. He cursed them for deceiving him, and asked why they did this to him. The screams of Clebius were heard by Lortel, who was currently in a place not far away. She then recalled the plan Ed had talked about. Ed deliberately pushed Clebius into the Nailgwyn corridor alone. Lortel then asked if he wanted to sacrifice Clebius. It might not be a bad idea, but morally, it was questionable, but Ed reiterated this was not a sacrifice. Clebius, despite his appearance, he's a top-ranked student and has outstanding endurance. Besides, the most crucial role belongs to her, Lortel, behind the Nailgwyn wall, outside the room practicing combat. Her job is to secure the entry point for Janika's group of conquerors, and it's her job to deliver the critical attack on Tarkan. It seemed that she was not the kind of person who liked to prejudge based on rumors. Others might hesitate, but as for her, she was good at this kind of thing. Lortel then attacked the wall using the ice shard fragments she had summoned. The impact of her attack was so powerful that it made a sizable hole in the wall. Looking at those who were just petrified, Lortel then asked what they were doing. They had to go in now. Come to think of it, during the joint combat training, she had used a forbidden mid-level spell to blow up the roof of Nailgwyn. Maybe that was why Ed assigned her this role. She felt Ed was an interesting guy. Instead of that, the entry point was secured. She then checked Clebius' current condition. Clebius is still running scared from Tarkan's pursuit while cursing the two of them. Even if the plan succeeds and the conquering group can enter without meeting Tarkan, the three of them will have to face Tarkan, who will explode. Facing Tarkan in the student square that has no way out, Lortel asked him if he wanted to die. Ed replied, they can't run and can't escape. They have no choice but to catch him. Because of his shell, no attack would work against it. Lortel then asked, hadn't he seen during the combined combat training, she had already lost to that spirit once, and none of the hunting group members could even scratch him. Hearing her doubts, Ed then took out a pouch. They could use this for the shell. He told her to just gather her magic and prepare. Seeing the pouch he took out, Lortel then asked what it was. As he recalled the incident, Ed thought Lortel was right. Without elemental slash, among the members of the conquest group, no one could destroy Tarkan's shell. The ice wall created by Lortel could even be destroyed easily by him. Ed then entered into a room. What they needed was a powerful force. There he saw Lucy, who was still sound asleep. Facing the last challenging chapter, there were few people who wanted to complete the objective to 100%, but he had tried it many times. Lucy was confused when someone suddenly interrupted her nap. Ed was annoyed that she could sleep at a time like this. After all, this was not daytime, this was night, since there was nowhere to rest after the shelter was destroyed. Lucy came to this rooftop, where she usually took a nap, more precisely, because she should not be involved in the scenario, so she continued to fall asleep. At that time Janika's condition was not good. Belle Maya became sensitive because of that. That's why, Lucy, who escaped, ran out of magic and fell asleep. Originally, this is a game mechanism to eliminate character imbalance from the scenario. Lucy then suddenly woke up after smelling beef jerky. The beef jerky turned out to be from the bag that Ed showed Lortel earlier. Now, with this, Ed then crammed all the beef jerky in the bag into Lucy's mouth at once. This is not the time to fuss. Ed then looked like he was going to throw Lucy. His target was the burning lizard. Ed wondered if his reach would be enough. He then calmed himself down. He had done this many times in the military. He then threw Lucy as fast as he could and shouted to make them all duck. When everyone was desperate when faced with the extraordinary strength of Tarkan, Lucy then came. She cursed Ed for throwing her so cruelly. But Lucy's arrival was immediately able to block the breath attack thrown by Tarkan. Lucy then attacked Tarkan using her lightning magic, high-level lightning magic. Heavenly punishment. The attack was so powerful that it illuminated everything. Fortunately, the people around there were protected by Lucy's protective magic, which made them come out unharmed. Although from a distance, Ed was also affected by Lucy's attack. It can be said, this is the most crucial moment. Tarkan, a high fire spirit, was previously unconquerable due to his hard shell despite all efforts, but now, after being struck by Lucy's high-level magic, his hard shell was broken. Now he was vulnerable to their attacks. Of course, defeating him would result in huge EXP points. Since it had come this far, Ed would certainly take everything he could. He will take the last hit. Janica was very blessed as a child. She had a mother who loved her very much, and a group of friends who depended on her very much. They made Janica the hope for second-year class, but it actually backfired on her, because the expectations were so great that she had to carry. It made Janica become very burdened. An explosion suddenly occurred in the building where Janica was, and the Conqueror group finally arrived in front of her. She then greeted them using her usual smile. The difference was that her smile was now a little sadistic. Janica was now protected by a pink barrier with chains tied around her body. The dark spirit philosopher was now also seen behind her. They could only be fascinated when they saw the extraordinary power that Janica and Philosopher released. Ed also noticed the commotion. He was surprised that those on Janica's side had just started. This scenario should have ended at dawn, but fortunately, he did not arrive too late. And as he approached the fire spirit Tarkan, he then saw Clebius, who was now still being oppressed by him. Ed then asked where Lucy was. Lortel replied, she was rolling around here, hiding in a corner. Ed would be relieved if Lucy could solve this situation, but Lortel was not sure she had the energy left to do that. Ed then invited her to solve this together. Coincidentally, that was what Lortel had planned to do. She was also surprised at Tarkan's defense. Even after she attacked him using 2 ice spears given all her magic power, he was still able to survive. Ed suggested beheading him. Her ice magic was not suitable for cutting neatly, so he volunteered to do it. Lortel was confused, since Ed was also a magic user like her. Wouldn't it be better if Clebius, who was a swordsman, did it? Ed then asked if he could. After seeing the state of Clebius, Lortel also realized that he couldn't. Ed said that he would be responsible for end this. He told Lortel to stop the movement of Tarkan once. He would risk his life to her, so he asked her to do it well. Lortel was then surprised to hear that. She was surprised that Ed was talking about accountability and risking his life so casually. Actually, if you think about it, this is an uncertain bet, but Ed said that this is not a bet. Life is not cheap. This is an investment. Lortel smiled at that, because that was her specialty. Instead of acting like a submissive princess, she preferred to act like a ruler with royal blood. Since Ed gave his life to her, she would also hang her life on him. Hearing that, Ed then immediately started, and when Clebius could no longer stand after being chased by Tarkan for so long, Ed then came forward. Tarkan, who saw that, immediately roared towards him. Both of them were almost exhausted. Even so, he understood why Clebius was afraid, because he could also feel how powerful Tarkan was when he got closer. And when Tarkan was about to release a burst of breath, Ed then cast his wind magic. But this was not enough. He had to get closer, but he was then surprised when he saw a giant chain foot suddenly appear above him. Ed realized that it was a Glaskin foot. Clebius was also surprised when he saw it. Ed then wondered if this meant that Taylor and his group were entering the last phase, meaning that things were going as expected. But the timing was not right. Anyone would definitely be distracted when seeing a scene like that, and Tarkan didn't stop his breathing at all. He wasn't bothered by it, but, even in the midst of this huge chaos, Lortel didn't make a mistake. Lortel's attack managed to crack Tarkan's skin. He looked shocked by it, and Ed finally managed to get closer to him. This was the spell he had cast hundreds or even thousands of times. Windblade, an extremely powerful and amazing windblade that finally managed to cut Tarkan's neck neatly. He then got a system notification after successfully defeating High Fire Spirit Tarkan, and his magic spirit proficiency also increased dramatically because of that. The spirit contract slot has been opened. He can now make a contract with the spirit, but Ed's attention was immediately distracted when he saw Taylor's action. Taylor was seen speeding towards Glaskin's chained legs, and when he got close, he then immediately sent a very strong slash, which created a very powerful explosion effect. Taylor then just fell and looked unconscious after launching his attack. Ed, who saw it, could only lament that Taylor was really the protagonist, with lightning striking and bright lights illuminating the sky above them, which signaled the end of this sudden catastrophe. The next day, when the sun had just risen to illuminate the world, Ed and his group were seen leaning under a tree while enjoying the morning sun. Seeing Ed's flat expression, Lortel then asked what was wrong with him. They had just survived the crisis between life and death, but his sentiments seemed to be too brief. She then stretched out her hand and invited him to get acquainted properly. "I am Lortel Ketchum." Ed did not refuse, but he was then surprised when he saw some gold coins in his hand. It was certainly Lortel's doing. She took advantage of the introduction between them to return the gold coins she had originally promised. Now he owes her. Lortel then said goodbye. Ed knew that Lortel wanted to try to maintain a relationship, but he didn't really want to have anything to do with her. But he was then surprised when Taylor suddenly approached him. Taylor said that he harbored hatred for him. He probably knew better. Seeing Taylor's new appearance now that his hair turned white, Ed realized that it was a manifestation of the Sword Saint ritual. Just like in the game, it was really impressive to him. Taylor continued, even so, he owed him a big thanks. While bowing, Taylor then sincerely thanked him. Clebius, who saw that, then told Taylor not to be so polite to people like Ed. One day, he wouldn't be surprised if he would stab them in the back. He almost died because of him. He seemed to still have a grudge with Ed for abandoning him when fighting Tarkan. After hearing Clebius' words, they then immediately told him to shut up. Phenia also admitted that Ed had a big contribution this time. She then invited him to enter the student council, but Ed immediately denied it and refused his invitation. Instead, the main damage provider in the conquest of Tarkan was Lucy, and Taylor also defeated Velosfer and Glaskin. He asked her to focus on that. Elvira then mocked him when she saw Ed so humble. Everyone knows the contribution of Lucy and Taylor. They are talking about other things. He told her not to be shy. Zix then told Elvira to respect Ed a little. Because he was her senior, Elvira was annoyed that Zix always took his side. Zix only asked her to show respect to Ed, so as not to affect the original storyline too much. He kept his distance from the main characters, but, when he saw them now, he couldn't help but feel warm. Even Ed couldn't help but smile at this moment, watching them in this world, playing their own roles, solving their own problems time after time. Taylor, who became strong in every trial, Isla, who became strong for Taylor, Phenia, who accepted her destiny as a princess, and slowly matured, Zix, who found his own way in the cracks of society, Clebius, who grew his confidence, and Elvira, who realized that pleasure and satisfaction are not everything in life. Lortel, who spent her life buried under a pile of gold coins, questioning her own life, all the main characters, with their respective roles, and in the end, the trophy of success. Realizing this fact, Ed then went to the place that he couldn't visit during the scenario. He then walked towards the cupboard beside the duel arena, looking at the cupboard lying in front of him. No matter how he thought, there were some things that felt lacking. That's why he was here, to shine light the success of the protagonists. Someone had to stay behind the curtain. Janica just chuckled when Ed found her. He then recalled when he was with Lortel. He asked why Janica was having a tantrum. Lortel said that she seemed to know the reason. She once happened to look into Janica's room. What she saw, there was a lot of sincere thanks, but, on her spacious desk, there was not even room to fully open a book. The quote stuck on the wall weighed on her shoulders like a stone. The solution was actually very easy. Just remove all the quotes from the wall and clean the table full of gifts piled up. But Janica's misery was that she was like a fairy tale character who was impossible to do such a thing. Feeling compelled to repay every kindness and sincerity with all her efforts, it was certainly a reckless act. There was no need to explain how stupid her thoughts were. The Velosfer dived into that darkness. Then Janica's tantrum could not be prevented, but Ed was confused. Why did it happen 1 month earlier than he expected? At the joint combat training, the original, Taylor was supposed to be the protagonist of this scenario, but with Lucy defeating Taylor in one attack, all the students turned into Janica fans. The reason Taylor could be defeated in one attack was because Lucy made a deal with Marilda. The opportunity to make a contract with Marilda arose because she often went to the North Forest, and she often went there because it was the perfect place for her to take a nap. The place to sleep was made by a character who was supposed to leave the stage at the beginning of Act 1. After being discovered by Ed, Janica just said she felt she knew why Lucy liked to nap here. It was very comfortable. She just didn't expect Ed to find it this easily. She thought the others had forgotten about her amidst all the chaos. It was a bit painful for her, after walking so proudly on the big stage, then forgotten after the problem was over. She thought they would immediately look for her whereabouts after seeing her disappear, but Ed said that she was hiding because she didn't want to be found. Janica didn't dodge. She didn't expect to be found this quickly. Even though she wanted to hide a little longer before going out, Ed then asked why. Janica replied she wanted to almost ugly cry now. Ed could only be silent hearing that. He then recalled the plea made by Marilda at that time. It seemed like a plea to save Janica from this incident, but he felt that it was impossible, because only he knew the future. Maybe what she meant was when everyone burdened Janica with attention, she probably thought that someone who kept her distance without being interested in Janica, could be someone she could rely on. But in the end, Janica's attempt failed. She tried to make a contract with the new high elemental spirit, but she rushed to do the summon ritual, then ended up being devoured by the dark spirit, and destroyed the faculty building in the process, studying and practicing magic until midnight, smiling for the sake of family, friends, and professors who supported her. But when she tried so hard to meet everyone's expectations, she must have had a really hard time in private, since that process itself was beautiful. Ironically, it made her failures also beautiful. Ed wasn't sure if this could comfort her. He then called out to her and said, "You've worked very hard." The parade of protagonists proudly crossed the stage above, amidst the applause and amazement. Meanwhile, backstage was quiet and dark. The end of Villain Act 1 was covered by the highlighted protagonists. Janica could only shed her tears after getting consolation from Ed. The spirits then suddenly floated to light up the room beautifully. Ed was amazed when he saw it. He had never witnessed a scene like this before. Of all the times he watched Act 1, only now he felt he had finally reached the end point. His magic spirit then rose to level 10, and some spirits began to have an interest in him, including the high wind spirit Marilda. Before he knew it, it had been 10 days since Janica's disciplinary committee finished. She confessed all her wrongdoings, and stated she would accept any punishment. However, from the first trial, her professors and friends came to her defense. At the second trial, Fenia declared she would not prosecute for the attempted murder of royalty, and testified that Janica, controlled by the philosopher, had no ill intent. Lortel acted to address the injuries and damages. The Elk Merchant Association fully funded the repairs without charging, of course. They made additional provisions to have the budget for the academic supplies they distributed to the school, and the final result of the trial was, Janica's privileges as a top-ranking student were revoked. All honor awards were returned. She was banned from entering Ophilus from the next semester. She was also kept under house arrest for 10 days and suspended for 20 days. But in exchange, she was not expelled from the academy. The professors and friends who supported her cheered happily when they heard the news. It was like a heart-wrenching youth drama. The friends were grateful that it was over, but they looked at Janica, who still looked gloomy. They felt that Janica must be very stressed at this time. Then, it was their turn to act. They then served Janica with drinks and ate sweet food to comfort her. They also whispered to never mention the Glasgow incident, and don't show unnecessary worry. Moreover, don't ask how she feels. It's better to talk about light and ordinary topics. They then agreed on that and prepared to encourage Janica. But Janica suddenly said, liking and loving someone, why do these two feelings feel so different? They were surprised when Janica suddenly talked about it. Janica then stammered, saying that it was about her friend. Blushing, she said, her friend was dreaming. After arranging a flower arrangement for someone, she was suddenly called from behind by someone. The person looked like Ed, who looked like a prince with his white horse. She then placed the flower arrangement on Ed's head and said that she made this for him, and they then had fun together. Janica said that her friend kept dreaming like that, but they immediately knew the truth behind Janica's clumsy lie. Because she couldn't even see anyone during the 10 days of house arrest, but they pretended not to know and asked, then what did her friend say again? Janica said, she sat in the room and daydreamed. Suddenly that person's face always appeared in her mind. Hearing that, one of her friends named Denise immediately ran away on the pretext that she had promised to help the assistant professor. Now only Clara is left. In order not to hurt Janica's sensitive heart, she must have this conversation. Slowly and carefully, one mistake will spread to the whole school, because this is the love story of Janica Faylover. She then called Janica and said, maybe you are thinking too much about it. Liking or hating someone is more complex than she thinks. Janica then asked, is it? Clara continued, isn't it better to just be honest with your feelings now? Isn't it better for you or for that person? Janica felt that Clara had a point. Clara then suggested to be careful in talking about this sensitive issue in the future. It could not be good for her reputation, or her friend, or that person. Janica finally realized that Clara was relieved because she managed to prevent rumors. Janica then thanked her for her advice. She said she would go back to the Ophilus Hall first to report on her suspension, while Clara just said she would sit here longer. She needed to think about something. She then waved her hand towards Janica as a form of farewell. Clara could finally be relieved after successfully encouraging Janica and preventing Janica from becoming more depressed. Back to Ed, he had been saving money endlessly, but thanks to Fenia, his fees for the next semester were waived. He then bought some equipment with the gold coins he had now. He was then surprised when he saw Janica in front of him. He had been avoiding her, but now that Act 1 starring Janica was over, Ed then took the initiative to greet her. He felt that maybe it didn't matter if he greeted her first. While Janica herself looked surprised when Ed suddenly greeted her, she then felt panicked and embarrassed to answer back his greeting. But she then didn't know what else to say. She then remembered Clara's words. She had to be honest with her feelings. Until finally she chose to run away on the pretext that she had a need in the Ophilus Hall. It was too hard for Janica, and Ed Roth-Taylor, who made the kind Janica be truthful, was kinda amazing in a way, but Ed then decided not to think about it too much, because he was going to be very busy too, looking at the spacious land in front of him. It was time to build the cabin he planned. On the first day, it started with selecting a shady, spacious, and inconspicuous location, then started with leveling the land. On the third day, he started collecting wood. This work was made easy thanks to his high wind blade proficiency. On the sixth day, he temporarily paused the construction of the cabin because the results of the end of semester exam had come out. His score was quite high in theory and his practical score was much higher than the average new student. But he was confused because Janica was still ignoring him. Janica's friends, Clara and Anise, signaled him to stay away. Even though he had no intention of approaching, on day 18, the construction of his cabin was almost complete. He wondered if there was anyone else who honed the wind blade skill so expertly like him. On day 20, the vacation began. He could dedicate all his time to the construction of his cabin. He also found Lucy, who was caught in the trap he set earlier, in a state of deep sleep. He felt it was time to stop using jerky as bait. On the 27th day, Maya visited. She also shared some herbs and mushrooms with him. When she asked about what happened to Janica, he replied that he seemed to have made Janica hate him, and Maya looked confused when she heard his answer. On the 30th day, one side of his wooden wall collapsed. He realized then that installing the joints properly wasn't enough to keep it up. He was upset about it, and when he went to school, he ran into Janica and her friends again near the dorm bakery. Janica, as usual, ran away as soon as their eyes met, and her friends were now looking at him with hatred. On the 37th day, Zix came to help. He then said that Taylor was a better person than he thought. As Ed had said before, Ed was happy that things were going according to his original story. Zix then asked if they were going to hammer this whole side too. Ed said no. He told him to leave that part alone. It was a place for sloppy smoke. And on the 45th day, Ed then walked to the cabin he had worked so hard to build. He then sat down to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Neither the floor nor the walls had been polished, and there was not a single piece of furniture. This was just a cabin made of rough wood, but it has this outer wall and roof. No insects can enter if the door is closed. Ed then stretched his neck while smiling slightly. A system notification then appeared. His crafting proficiency increased after successfully crafting a wooden cabin with a difficulty level of 4 stars, and Ed now finally has his own home. Outside the cabin, Janica was seen hiding behind a tree. She was currently peeking at Ed with a feeling of embarrassment. Ed then thought about what else he needed to add to his cabin. He felt that adding walls, floors, furniture, a fireplace, and a fence might be a good idea. He also felt that it would be good to have a small storage shed for firewood and other items. Ed suddenly noticed the presence of someone on the roof of his cabin. That person turned out to be Lucy, who was now fast asleep on the roof. But Ed was then surprised when he saw someone suddenly greeting him. That person was Janica. Ed then greeted her back. He also asked what made her come here. Janica immediately sweated and could only smile awkwardly at his question. She then recalled her conversation with Maya. While combing her hair, Maya told her. At that time she visited the forest and saw an interesting sight at Ed's camp. Janica then asked if she meant his hut. Hearing that, Maya then asked how she knew. Janica only replied that she saw it while passing by. Maya could only accept the random answer from Janica. She continued, she said Ed himself built it. Surprisingly, the shape looked good, quite satisfying. She didn't know that Ed had such talent. Janica was happy when Maya praised Ed. Maya said she also wanted to go inside the cabin. She wanted to see the contents and confirm its sturdiness. Janica blushed after hearing that, because she also had such thoughts. Maya again whispered in her ear. After all, she was human. Wouldn't anyone passing by be curious about who built it and what was inside? That's a normal response. Maya's whisper is like the devil's whisper for Janica. back to Ed. Blushingly Janica then said that she was just passing by, as if she wanted to visit Marilda. She saw the cabin and wanted to check it out. Wasn't he curious about who made it and what was in it? Isn't that normal? Hearing that Ed could only answer yes. Janica then embarrassedly praised that the cabin was cool. Ed said that he built it not long ago. Did the spirits not tell him? Janica stammeringly replied that the spirits did tell her, but only just, which made him think, oh, apparently there is a cabin there. Janica lied, because in fact she had ordered the spirits to spy on Ed's daily life all this time. She also asked them to tell her about Ed's body that they peeped into. She even always had nosebleeds every time she listened to reports from the spirits. But Janica still said that she didn't chat much with the spirits. She didn't know much about Ed's daily activities, but she was then surprised when Ed suddenly invited her to go into his cabin for a while. Janica immediately blushed and happily accepted his invitation. Once inside, Janica was amazed and wondered if Ed himself made all this, and without realizing that night had finally arrived, they then made a campfire to warm themselves. After receiving a cup of warm water from Ed, Janica then said that she owed a lot this time. Even the princess and Lortel went that far. There were also friends who offered to lend her dues money. She confusedly asked how she could pay all this. Ed was silent for a moment after hearing that. He then said, if she couldn't pay it, then forget it. The idea that she had to pay the debt was probably a deeply ingrained idea. Janica had never thought of it that way. Indeed, Janica was that kind of person. Her problem started because she was burdened by that sincerity, something that many people didn't understand. Although there were many people who offered to provide help or lend her the dues money, she then decided to choose to enter the outdated Dex Hall instead of the upper-level Ophilus Hall, perhaps to reduce her debt even a little. But in Ophilus Hall, one room is for one person, while in Dex Hall one room is for 8 or more people. For Janica, all day being in the middle of many people looking at her enviously must have felt like being imprisoned. In the end, none of the problems were solved. She has not been able to get out of the vicious circle. Ed then said, if she wants to enjoy her own time, she can come here and stay whenever she wants. He doesn't mind. Janica was silent for a moment after hearing that. She then smiled and accepted his offer. She also thanked him for that. She also asked Ed to tell her if he was having a hard time or there was something that was very difficult to face alone. She promised that she would definitely help. Ed just smiled at that. He also pondered what difficulties he would face. The second semester would come soon. It was time for Act 2 to start. That old book, The Sage's Scroll, a book written by the great sage of Sylvania that contains holy magic. Holy study is known as a high-level magic discipline that defies the laws of the world. The storm triggered by it will devour the entire academy. Looking at the protected book in front of her, Lortel could smell the scent of money from it, but still, Ed felt that it would not happen, so he refused Janica's helping hand. He appreciated her intentions, but it would not happen. To him, it seemed that it was Taylor who would soon face a difficult time. This was not really his business, but it would be very difficult. He then encouraged himself. The failed swordsman of Sylvania, Act 2, the Ophilus Hall occupation incident. The upperclassmen at Ophilus Hall were like a nobleman, priority seating in class, freedom at mealtimes, personal servants, and other comforts that were on a whole different level. The problem began here. As soon as the vacation ended and the return to the academy began, heavy rains poured down on the southwestern part of the Bel Air region, where the island of Arkan was located. The academy, normally, provided horse-drawn carriages to return to the academy in ships exclusively for the students of Ophilus Hall, and even allowed several days of tardiness without penalty. On the contrary, for the students of Dex Hall, even those who managed to reach the academy after braving the torrential rain, worried about the penalties that could be earned for missing the deadline of returning to the academy. Right here it exploded, of course. All this happened because of the intervention of a certain merchant. That merchant had already made contact with Will Rain, the representative of the low-ranked students. This person was just planning a way to launch an attack on the academy in Ophilus Hall. The discontent that had already peaked was enough to give a reason that would trigger the anger of the low-ranked students and ordinary students, and the rest would be taken care of by Will Rain, a master of incitement and oratory. The situation was ready. A clear difference in service between ordinary students who had to go through a torrential downpour to return to the academy, and the special treatment for Ophilus Hall students. Lortel then sent a proposal to adjust and support the flexible return period given specifically to Ophilus Hall students. Some of the butlers and administrative review departments that manage the Ophilus Hall are already on Lortel's side. They will support Lortel's proposal. At this point, it is not important whether the academy does accept Lortel's proposal or not. Just seriously discussing such a proposal is enough to trigger the anger of the lower-ranked students. The situation should be made as big and exciting as possible. The Office Hall is filled with artworks entrusted by noble and influential families. The walls, carpets, and wooden furniture are all the work of craftsmen. The more property damage, the better. Ideally, destroying the Office Hall would be best. If they caused a big enough mess, it would deal a fatal blow to the Academy's finances, which were already cornered by the Glasgow incident. And it would give the Elk Merchant Association an advantage in the ongoing negotiations regarding the purchase of the Sage's Scroll. The Sage's Scroll is the heart of Sylvania, a magic tome, but sometimes those who are cornered will put even their heart into the negotiation table. Looking at the rain that never stopped, she then wondered when the rain would stop, the supportive sky without sunlight. Just like the sky she used to see through the leaking roof tiles in the slums, she mocked herself for being comfortable. This romantic learning center has a lot of light sources. In the darkness inherent in life, this dirty self is increasingly apparent, a table full of traces of conspiracy, evidence of a dark life, always attacking from behind and doubting the intentions of others, the characteristics of a life filled with desperation to survive. While trying to survive, somehow it has become like that, but this did not change her filthy and tainted origin, so as if bewitched, she wandered around looking for someone similar, even in Sylvania, which is filled with shining people, whether there could be anyone who would accept a filthy and tainted mouse. Relying on uncertain hope, wandering aimlessly in search of family ties, Lortel suddenly feels lonely, the nature of which never changes. Lortel's attitude to survive the sad reality is always the same. Lortel is always the dark curtain that hides the grim truth behind the scenes. The audience calls it the black curtain. In the original story, the Office Hall occupation incident was a story where the protagonist had to stop the low-ranking students triggered by Lortel in Office Hall on several floors. There were mid-bosses who helped the low-ranking students and hindered the protagonist. The first-floor mid-boss Windcatcher Tote, he was the one who mocked Taylor as a failed student, was easily bribed by Lortel after holding a grudge for being defeated by Taylor's group. His role was to overcome the new servants guarding the first floor, and open the door of Office Hall, to let the students in. The students were then shocked and they saw the door suddenly open from the inside. They then immediately rushed inside, hoping that their cries could be better heard by the Academy. And when the students passed through the first floor, the person who played the role of stopping the protagonist's group from coming to block them was the first act two-phase boss, Windcatcher Tote. But when Will Rain met him, he was shocked because he didn't think that the person who was bribed by Lortel was someone he never expected. Tote was supposed to do this role at first, but somehow Ed replaced him. And he himself was surprised because he had become the mid-boss now.